Residents' rights, abuse and neglect. We're going to talk about what constitutes a vulnerable adult. We're going to explain what abuse and neglect are, what actions constitute abuse and neglect, and tell how we report that. If you have any questions after this presentation, ask your supervisor, and please report to your supervisor if you expect any abuse or neglect of our residents.
Tonight, 2 Minnesota teenagers are accused of physically and sexually assaulting patients in a nursing home, just for laughs.
A warning, some of the details of this story are hard to believe and may be difficult to hear. Brianna Breutzman and Ashton Larson worked as nursing assistants at the Good Samaritan Society in Albert Lea. As Liz Collins shares, prosecutors say the girls got away with the abuse for months, even though other teenagers knew about it.
Accusations say they spit in their mouths, spanked them, and poked them in the breasts. Just a few of the things prosecutors say these part-time nursing assistants did to 15 nursing home residents for at least 5 months for fun.
It's been very difficult for our staff, for our current residents, for our families. It's been a challenge for the community.
The sordid stories first came to light in May after a group of girls who were students at Albert Lea High School and worked at the Good Samaritan Society finally fessed up. Documents say Breutzman and Larson bragged to them about arousing male residents with Alzheimer's and dementia and sticking their fingers in their rectums. It took 7 months for charges to be filed.
We are just really thankful that the proceedings we're moving forward, and we can hopefully see some closure to this whole process.
Very disappointed, very upset about the whole situation.
Sue Johnson's mother is a resident here and admits it was a difficult decision to make after hearing the abuse allegations.
At that moment that we needed to bring her to a nursing home, we had no choice. So they assured me when we brought her in that it was a much better, they were really watching everything now.
The state says the nursing home did nothing wrong, and documents say the girls were confident they would not get caught because the residents did not have their minds. If they are convicted of these misdemeanor charges, they could spend several years in jail and pay thousands of dollars in fines. 4 other girls were also charged today with keeping their mouths shut while all this apparently was going on, Amelia. All of the girls, we should say, have been fired.
Such a disturbing story.
Okay, how horrible that is. I think there are some important things to know. Obviously, you don't want to abuse any of our residents, but if you know of abuse going on and you don't report it, you are also liable. So who is a vulnerable adult? Somebody who is 18 years of age or older, regardless of residence. They have some sort of an impairment or disability, and because of this, they have an impaired ability to meet basic needs or an impaired ability to protect themselves from maltreatment by others. Who is a vulnerable adult? Any person 18 years of age or older, as I said, that's a resident of an inpatient facility in Minnesota or receives care from the state of Minnesota in some way. Abuse is defined as a willful act against a vulnerable adult, willfully inflicting injuries, reasonably confining them or intimidating them. Punishment resulting in physical harm or pain, some sort of sexual contact, mental anguish, psychologically upsetting them and depriving them of care. What is neglect? Neglect is a failure to provide for basic needs that may cause harm physically or mentally, like food, shelter, health care, supervision. Neglect can be by a caregiver, or they could have self-neglect. Verbal abuse would be oral, written, gestured language, derogatory terms, whether or not they could understand it. Sexual abuse would be some sort of sexual harassment or coercion or assault. Physical abuse is pretty obvious: hitting, slapping, pitching, kicking, force-feeding them, grabbing hard and leaving some sort of marks. Mental abuse, psychological abuse, humiliating or intimidating them, teasing them and calling them names, harassing them, teasing them, as I said earlier, demeaning, threatening, punishment, and withholding treatment or services. Involuntary seclusion would be separating a resident from others against their will, or also keeping them in their room against their will. Sometimes in an emergency we do have to separate a resident because they could harm other residents. Misappropriation of residence property, stealing, we can't do that. We can't take it temporarily or permanently without the resident's consent. The Vulnerable Adult Act started in 1980, and obviously it's to protect the population that is easily victimized. There were some amendments to the Vulnerable Adult Act, and that's why we have background checks for our employees. Facilities that have to do this are licensed facilities in the state of Minnesota: hospitals, nursing homes, residential or non-residential facilities, home care providers. The goal of the Vulnerable Adult Act is obviously to protect vulnerable adults from maltreatment, provide safe living environments for adults who have been maltreated, assist persons caring for vulnerable adults to provide safe environments, and define who does not qualify as a vulnerable adult. Upon admission, our representative will tell the resident about our abuse policies and prevention and tell them how to complain about if they feel they're being abused. And they also need to know that they should not fear being punished because they complain. Our new hires get a state background check, and if the background check isn't good, you will be terminated. Also, the Residents' Rights and Abuse law makes it so you have to be trained every year about residents' rights and abuse, and I have to keep your materials for a couple years. Preventing of abuse policies and procedures. Residents having a history of abuse, we have to have interventions, obviously, to occur so it doesn't happen again, and we reassess whether at care conferences, what I'm talking about is family members who have abused them in the past. So we want to make sure they're not with some family member who they're questioning whether has abused them in the past. We want to make sure they're not like in the Marion conference room, where there aren't many people around, as well as physical therapy, Lakeville, the snack shop, and our lobby. To prevent abuse, we always have adequate staff. Our supervisory staff will correct any unacceptable behavior, such as using poor language and being rough or ignoring our residents, using some sort of inappropriate behaviors. If employees don't listen to their supervisor, they will be let go. If there is abuse, we will investigate and document and report as necessary. To prevent abuse, we have our employees that receive abuse information report it immediately to the administrator and the DON, and they'll get that information to the county and state. In your handbook, all these numbers are available. You can report to these numbers as well as the administrator and the DON. If you report, your confidentiality is protected. We're not going to let people know that you were the one who told on them. And if you made a mistake and there wasn't something really going on, there will be no retaliation if you did it in good faith. What must be reported? Abuse, as I said earlier, verbal neglect, physical abuse, mental abuse, injury of unknown sources. You know, when you see something where it hasn't been documented, no one knows where this resident got this injury, it needs to be looked into. And that's when you need to make sure the DON and the administrator know about this. And also abuse would be stealing residents' property. More on the known injury, you got to make sure it's reported to the nurse. It's got to be documented in the chart care plan about this unknown injury. The notes need to be reviewed from the past to see what could have happened. Again, the administrator and DON need to be notified immediately because of any suspicion of maltreatment. And then it would be immediately reported to the Office of Health Facility Complaints in the county. Investigating abuse and neglect, the charge nurse would examine the patient and record the findings in the chart. The DON administrator would be notified. Nurses or social service would complete an abuse reporting as our policies. Staff would monitor the resident. The administrator would appoint someone to investigate the incident. Accused individuals at the facility would not be able to be with that resident. They may be on unpaid leave or be under direct supervision. The results of the investigation will be filed with the DON's incident report and recorded on the investigation incident report. And the DON administrator will inform the results to the resident or their representative. If an employee is found guilty, they will be terminated. They could be charged with a criminal offense depending what happened. They could lose their license if they are a licensed employee. Or if they're not guilty, the manager will determine whether there's any actions that need to be done for the employee to resume their duties. People who are mandated to report abuse and neglect: licensed health and human service professionals, personal care attendants, employees of a licensed facility. Basically, everybody who's employed here at Devine is a licensed reporter, mandated, because you are an employee of a licensed facility. And if you don't report, you could be guilty of a crime and liable for damages for failure to report. So I want to make that clear. If you work in the kitchen, you are a mandated reporter. So as laundry, as well as the nurses, or in the business office. Everyone else can report, but they are not. It is not mandatory for them. So here at DPH, we hope to keep everyone free from abuse and neglect.